All right, welcome everybody to the AI for Operators event series. I'm Mike Stone here with Nick Maloney. We are the co-founders of the Gnar company. We're an AI native software partner that focuses on AI strategy, AI fluency, custom software development, and legacy system modernization. We are in session 3 of our 4 session event series here. Um, we started this event series for non-technical leaders. We want to target people that have seen a lot of buzz and seen a lot of kind of magic on the internet around AI, but really want to get the most out of AI themselves and get some ideas about how to effectively roll out AI in their organizations. And so we've been taking some baby steps here. We started with our first session on prompting um, and creating a framework around how to have effective prompts to get great output. Last session was on projects and workflows, starting to encapsulate context in projects so we don't have to repeat ourselves. And we're going to introduce 2 fundamentally different capabilities this session. That's going to be artifacts and Claude Code, and then secondly, skills. So first things first, we're going to start looking at what artifacts are and how we can create them using Claude Code. With artifacts, we'll be asking Claude not just to do the work, but actually to create these reusable assets. We'll then do a demo where we will take a spreadsheet and convert that into a real software tool. Then we're going to change gears and talk about skills, what those are and how we can create them and why we might want to create them. We'll do a demo where we take a workflow that we did last week in session 2 and convert that into a skill, and then spend a little bit of time towards the end talking about when you should and when you shouldn't reach for these tools that we are introducing today. So, as always, please feel free to provide any questions you have in the chat, and we will be sure to get to those at the end of the session, if not before then. All right, let's get into artifacts first. Everything that Claude has produced for us so far in this series has been text in a chat window, which is great, but artifacts are going to be a little bit different. An artifact is a standalone piece of content that renders in its own window next to a conversation. And these can be kind of downloaded, extracted, and shared. So this is kind of the difference between describing a thing and creating a thing. We're gonna actually create a working interactive calculator that you can click and use in a few minutes here. But um, the types of artifacts that we can create within Claude are things like documents, whether it's markdown documents that we've talked about in the past, or Word documents, Excel files. We can create code snippets. We can create entire HTML pages, uh, SVG images or PNG images, different types of diagrams, and like visualizations. So we'll explore a few of these as we get into it. But what we can do is we'll be able to preview our artifact in Claude Desktop. I'll show you this soon, and we can actually, tweak and enhance it as we go. Again, we can also like download and share, so we can provide these, to the team for their use as well. This is the first session where we're going to get into Claude Code. Our past sessions were working in different modes like co-work. Now we're going to start actually producing code from the work that we do. Um, and Claude will actually write software for us. So you do not need to know how to code. You just need to know how to describe what you want in plain language, and Claude's gonna write the code for us. And then we can ask for whatever changes we want. This is what people mean. If you've heard the term vibe coding before, this is vibe coding. There's going to be three sub modes within Claude Code. Um, we'll be primarily working in like an auto mode where Claude will just kind of make decisions and produce code, as well as a plan mode where Claude will actually outline the approach first. And then once we approve that approach, it'll execute it. So I'm going to start in plan mode today so we can see Claude's approach, and then we'll switch to code mode for the build. And that's kind of a best practice when vibe coding in general. Um, I'll touch on this some more later on in the in the session, but there is a difference between things that you should lean on Claude Code for and the things you shouldn't. So things that you should use it for are the type of functionality that we're creating today. It's internal calculators and tools, or simple dashboards and visuals from spreadsheet data, form-based workflows, simple web pages. What you don't want to use it for are like complex integrations with existing systems, real security requirements, large user scale, something needing maintenance by other people. We'll come back to that later on. But the tool that we'll build in this demo in just a minute here, it will work, but there is going to be a gap between the like, I built a thing that works and this thing runs our business. So that is a gap where there's, bugs or security issues that might get missed, or maintenance that becomes a problem 6 months down the road. But we'll get to that some more after the demo. So let's talk about what we'll be building in this demo. I want to set up a scene that may or may not be familiar to you. But let's just say you are like us and you have a spreadsheet that calculates project profitability. Somebody built this Excel file years ago and it works, but it also has room for error. Like someone could accidentally edit a formula and all of a sudden our numbers are coming out wrong, or everyone on the team is kind of using a different flavor of this. So because nobody trusts one completely. And so what we'll be doing is taking that scenario and replacing that with a Claude artifact. To do this, let me first open up Claude. Most of our work in Claude has been in this home tab over here, where we've kind of gone between chat mode and co-work mode. Today, we're going to switch over into this code mode. And what I can do here is I'm going to actually be creating files on my local file system. And so I have selected here session 3, but you can come into your Claude desktop and select the file that you want to work in. This could be an existing code base or a place with a lot of documents. This could be a brand new folder on your system where you just want the stuff you make to show up. Then down here, this is where we select between the different modes. So we have this accept edits mode on by default, but this is where we can see there's a manual mode where Claude will ask before making changes. And there's this plan mode where we'll actually be able to see the plan that Claude's going to execute before it does it. And then some other modes that we won't get into as much, but they're kind of other flavors of this auto mode. I'm going to paste in a prompt here. For this example, I can change between the different models. I'm just gonna decide to use Opus. Well, let's use Opus 5. It just came out, and let's see how good a job it does here. Um, all right, I'm going to send this so we can start working on it here. But let me describe what we're going to be building here. This prompt says, I want to build a project profitability calculator for a professional services firm. A single clean page I can use in the browser. No login, no database, nothing saved between sessions. The inputs are going to be the project name and the client name, the total contract value in dollars, a table of roles where I can add or remove rows. Each row has a role name, hours billed, and hourly cost rate. There's a single field for additional non-labor costs. And then the calculations that should update live as I type are total labor cost, total project cost, gross margin, margin percentage. And then next to the margin, we want to show a status indicator of green at 40% or above, yellow between 25 and 40%, and red below 25%. The style should be clean and professional, readable from across a conference room, big numbers for gross profit and margin, dollar amounts formatted with commas, everything on one page. And so it's asking us now, how do you want to open and use this page? Do we want a local HTML file, a published artifact, or both? For this example, I'm just going to create a local HTML file. And so Claude is now, it's actually invoking a skill that I have that will kind of do some of this planning work for us. Um, but we're getting another question here. How should the roles table behave out of the box? Blank rows plus per row cost. That is fine. Um, but you can see, despite kind of starting in plan mode, Claude's actually determined that this is pretty well defined. Um, we can just move into the auto mode. Um, that was done as part of this brainstorming skill that I have preloaded here. But if this was a more complicated build, we'd get a lot more information and a lot more questions from Claude to determine what the plan should be. We're getting some updates here. Nick, while this is outputting, do you want to talk a little bit about model selection when it comes to using Claude Code?
Yeah, earlier you had seen Mike select Opus as the model, and that's what we recommend for most coding tasks. Coding is a complex activity and requires a decent amount of context, instructions, and also returns a lot. And some of the lighter weight models like Sonic, Sonnet rather, in Haiku, um, they'll work, but we found that the complexity of the application and just the level of thinking isn't as in depth versus something like Opus, which is capable of building some really complex software. I've actually found that from a software building and coding perspective, I think Opus does a better job than Fable right now. Fable is almost too much and can sometimes like overcomplicate things, and obviously there's a cost associated with it. So if you were to whether it's vibe code or do more of the traditional agentic development type tasks, I'd highly recommend choosing Opus.
Fantastic. So while you were talking, I did move us through this step, but just so you can see what Claude did was it outlined a few approaches and then gave its recommendations kind of for each. So for the output, the approaches were either creating one self-contained HTML file, an HTML file with separate CSS and JavaScript files, or using a framework via CDN like React or Alpine, and it just said, I'm going with the simple and easy way. I'm going with A, which is what we want to do. So that's great. And then it had some information for us on where it wants to take the design uh, in terms of the layout and the calculation, some formatting edge cases, and it kind of laid out its plan here and said, like, does this look right? And this would have been our opportunity to adjust anything that we wanted. But for the sake of this demo, I just said, looks great. So it is now going to um, design what this should look like and then execute the code itself. Um, we'll also be able to make changes afterwards, and I'll show an example of what that'll look like. But when you're working in Claude in general, everything is editable and in a state of fluctuation. So we are going to be actually creating files that live on our machine and can be updated as we need them to. A thing to keep in mind as you're working within Claude Code and Claude in general, but this happens a lot within Claude Code, is this window down here, which is your context window. You can see here we've used 7% of our context window. We want to make sure that we don't overflow the context window. That's basically asking Claude to remember too much. And when that happens, um, things can start to go haywire. That's where you'll start to see more hallucinations. And so what's important to do is to take these artifacts and actually have them on your local machine so that you could easily spin up another Claude Code session that kind of picks up where the last one left off, and you have a fresh context window to work with. So I hope that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, definitely ask questions in the chat, but keep an eye on this monitor. You get a little high level circle graph view in the bottom here. But because we're able to target these specific directories with Claude Code and give it specific files, it becomes easy to, up here, click new, start a new session of Claude Code, and pick up where the last one left off, even though it doesn't have direct access or memory of your past sessions. So you can see here, we're still creating, looks like we're just about at the end of generating this output, but we ran a skill. We'll talk about skills soon um, for designing the front end and then writing the spec and building it. We could get into the nitty gritty of everything that it's building if we want to. But we can see this is actually starting to be produced here. This is the artifact that I was referring to before when I mentioned that um, we'll be able to view the artifacts in a split panel and have like be able to chat right next to our artifact to make whatever changes we want to make. This is actually like a browser that is being opened in Claude, but you can see I have this file, project profitability.html, that is being served from my file system. So just to show you what I mean here, I'm going to open up session 3 here. Let's see, project profitability.html. This is the file that Claude just created. And I can just click to open this with Google Chrome and then just bring that window over here. And this is what we just created. Um, I'm going to stick to the I'm going to stick to the other the in Claude view of this, but just wanted to illustrate that we can open that up um, in a browser as well. It's actually, this is kind of interesting what it's doing now as well. It's reviewing its own work and making changes as it goes. So it's actually updated this layout a couple times to make sure it is readable and has a good user experience. So you can see it's making two fixes. The project name clips at longer titles, and the per row cost figures are lighter than they should be for numbers people read off screen. So it is going to make those changes, and it's using some sample data here to populate it and test it out. It's now resizing the window so that it can test how it looks on mobile. So it's being pretty thorough here. And that's due to some of the preloaded skills that I have. Well, again, we'll get into skills later, but there is a whole marketplace of skills. So if there's a type of work you do frequently, um, like front end development work, there are skills in marketplaces available where you can bring in um, skills that will help Claude work through like a tried and true process for building stuff. Okay, I'm actually going to open this into the browser so we can see it a little bit more clearly here. So I lied, but here we are. Okay, so you'll notice I didn't write any code here. I didn't draw any wireframes. I just described the tool the way that I would describe it to a person, and this is what it came out with. Let's kind of use this. I have a sample project here we can use it with to Acme dashboard rebuild. Client name is Acme Industrial. Say the total contract value 175K. You can see things start to update as I type. And here we're going to have a senior engineer. They're going to be on for 400 hours, and their cost rate is $85 an hour. A mid-level engineer for 500 hours at $65 an hour. Again, everything is adjusting. We're still in a healthy margin here. Designer for 150 hours at $70 an hour. And we're going to add another one for a project manager, 200 hours at $60 an hour. Let's say we have some non-labor costs of 10,750 for things like hosting or software licenses, or maybe there's a QA contractor. But at the end of the day, this is what we've got from our calculator. This is a little bit easier to work with and view than an Excel file. This is an HTML file that we could host somewhere and share amongst the team, and everyone's using the exact same thing. They can't change any of the calculations under the hood here, and we can see um, the the output, the things that we care about. So we have a $175,000 contract value. We are have 89,000 in people costs, a total project costs of just under $100,000. Our gross margin is just over $75,000, and we've got a 43% healthy profit margin. Great. So let's course correct a little bit. We actually want to make some changes here. Let's say we want to view these side by side. So like we actually want, this is great, but we want to kind of have a comparison here. So let me see if I can find what I'm looking for. Yep. All right. I'm going to prompt Claude. Again, I can do that right here. I could just say add a section that lets me compare two projects side by side. This may ask me questions. So one thing that Claude's getting very good at that I used to have to bake into my prompts is recognizing when it needs to ask you more information about your request so that it can give you the type of output you're looking for. So let's see. Here we go. It did prompt a question. What does comparing two projects look like for you? Um, Two full calculators side by side. Let's go two. It's going to recommend this snapshot, but I think what I want to do is two full calculators side by side, and we'll see what that looks like. Nick, while this is crunching here, can you maybe touch on, we're generating an HTML file here. Should we be sharing this throughout the team as an HTML file, or are there better ways to share these sorts of artifacts?
Yeah, like hosting in general is a pretty broad topic and worthy of its own workshop. Um, this example is an HTML file, so it's a relatively straightforward scenario. The most basic way of sharing it is you could literally give someone this file and they could double click it and have access to it because it's single shared artifact. But that can be challenging. And earlier when Mike was generating this, Claude asked if it should be a shared artifact that would then give a link that you could share with other team members. And that's probably the most straightforward way of sharing a file like this. Obviously, if you're doing other file formats, like say a Word doc, use something like Google Docs is probably the easiest way to do that. As we get into more advanced applications that are maybe written using JavaScript or have a database for persistence, you're going to want to consider a more robust hosting option. And that's a very broad topic. Generally speaking, we really gravitate towards something like Cloudflare. It's very affordable, very scalable, and it'll handle everything from hosting an HTML file to a very complex node application with databases, and it'll also give you a domain. So if you wanted calculator.mydomain.com, it would handle that. But early on, if you're just knocking out these prototypes, I think the shared Claude link is a good way to start. And then over time, you can migrate it to a more complex application and consider hosting and all of the fun challenges that come along with that.
Yeah, we might be able to touch on that in a little bit as well, like creating actual artifacts within Claude, because that is a thing that you can do, where you could upload a simple HTML file to be shared amongst the team. And this is a good example for when to do that because we don't have a database. This is just pure HTML, so it'd be very easy to do that. It gets more complicated as you get into uh, more vibier of the vibe code projects with databases and integrations and all that fun stuff. Um, so this request that I just had, adding a section that lets me compare two projects side by side. Like, traditionally, this would be something where this request has to be, filed as a ticket, worked through with a product manager, uh, worked on during a sprint planning meeting, scheduled into a sprint, and it could take weeks for something like this to be implemented. Whereas doing it this way, we're able to, make this request right away and see it in a manner of a few minutes here. So Claude accepted this prompt and uh, accepted the answer to the question that it proposed, and then gave us the approach. So it's saying it's going to do a mode toggle in the header between one project, which will be the default, and compare to. The single mode stays exactly as good as it is now. Claude giving itself some props there. And the compare mode will reveal the second project. So it actually gave this like what's called an ASCII diagram of what the layout would look like in the compare to mode. Um, and then it's got it, flagged a few items and asked if it looks good. So I didn't read through this super thoroughly before telling it to move on, but for the sake of the demo and time today, we're just gonna let it rip. We can check in on the context window today and right now and just see that it did increase. It was at about 7% before. We're up at 12%. We still have plenty of context remaining. I'm not worried about this at all. Another thing that's helpful here is we can check on our usage limits. So this can help you kind of decide how hard you want to go, given the usage limits that you have. Um, so we are getting some updates. You can see here we've got the one project and compare to. This is using the mobile view now. How do we just get back to the web? I don't know, but we can easily work on it here. All right, so I just refreshed the page, so we are still loading in that same project profitability, and we can either be in the one project mode, which we just looked at, sorry, or we can use this project comparison. You can see we're running into some issues. I'm sure Claude is going to be working through these. Um, some like little UI tweaks here. Like you can see when we scroll, it's a little bit funky, but these are the kind of common problems to vibe coding. Let's start putting some information in. So let's say, what did we have for our data here? We had Acme dashboard rebuild, and this is going to be Acme industrial. And let's create a new one called Beacon Legacy Migration. Client name for this one is Beacon Supply Company. Total contract value for this is 175. This is 175 as well. Or sorry, this one's going to be 120. Roles. For this one, we had our senior engineer at 400 hours, 85 an hour, mid-level engineer, 500 hours at 65 an hour, designer, 150, 70 an hour, and we're going to add a role for the project manager, 200 at 60, and our additional non-labor costs we said were 10,750. Okay, now we'll move to this Beacon Legacy Migration project. And let's say we've got a senior engineer here, 350 hours at $85 an hour, mid-level engineer, 450 at $65 an hour, and project manager, 150 hours at $60 an hour. And our additional non-labor costs, 14,500. Okay, so all of this updated as we went, but now we can see a clear, healthy margin from Acme dashboard rebuild and a lower kind of watch margin on Beacon Legacy migration. The point is, again, we are building this application, this HTML file, not knowing how to code, but just describing the functionality that we want. So think about this and relate it to whatever you do and however, you think you could start to migrate spreadsheets to applications like this, or take other workflows and start building them in this way using Claude Code. Um, so in sum, that this tool that Claude built here, this will work, but again, there is a gap between the I built this thing that works, and this thing runs our business. And that is where we get bugs or security issues or maintenance problems. Like we saw before, we're getting some kind of weird UX stuff. As we build things out, we can run into more things like this. And so it's just worth exploring this technology and using it where you should, but being aware of, when you hit the limits there. All right, I want to move on to skills now. We built a workflow in session 2, and that was around like a report generation. So we had a like weekly operations report that we were working on. And the challenge that people can run into with like the projects is that there can still be this need to re-explain how the process works, or hand it off to somebody else on the team, and they prompt slightly differently than you and get a different result because of that. um, and it's basically the same problem that like your business has always had, is that you like figure out a good process, but it lives in your head and you can do it, but it's hard to like reliably transfer it to people. And so that's what a skill is going to help us with. A skill at the end of the day is just a document. It's actually a markdown file, and it has instructions for Claude. So this is your standard operating procedure that is written for Claude instead of a person. So it describes a lot of what we talked about in the prompting session around role, context, task, format, and constraints. It knows what the task is, what the inputs to ask for are, what steps to follow, the format of the output, the quality checks. And then you end up invoking a skill, and Claude is going to like systematically execute those instructions. So it'll happen every time. It'll be the same process, the same quality. And in fact, we've been using skills all along in this session. So Claude comes baked in with a number of skills for like Excel or Word and PowerPoint and PDFs. These automatically get activated, and I'll show a little bit about how Claude knows whether to activate a skill or not later. Um, and then there's the marketplace of skills. Like I mentioned before, Claude Code was using a skill that I had installed, an open source skill that I had installed on my instance so that it could use that. And now we can create custom skills by defining our specific processes. Skills and projects work really well together. So think of the project as our team's knowledge base, and the skill as the playbook. So the project is going to hold the context, and the skill is going to execute the process. So they're going to work together. We've been kind of building on this progression up until now, where we started with, session 1 just with a really good prompt. And then level 2, having a workflow defined in a project. And now we're going to get that to a skill, which is like packaging that workflow into a command that anyone on your team could run. So if maybe think about what happens when your best analyst runs a report versus when a new hire runs it. It's going to be a different quality. The skill can eliminate that gap. That expertise like really gets described in the file that we're gonna create. Um, okay. So last session we built this weekly ops report workflow. And so what we're now gonna do is migrate that into a skill. So I'm gonna hop back into Claude. I'm gonna come back here. Um, and I'm back in like cowork and chat mode. I'm not using Claude Code for this. I have my project and I'm going to come into my weekly operations report. All I need to do here, and this is a little bit meta, but I'm actually going to use a less complicated or a less time intensive model for the sake of the demo. I think Sonnet will work fine here. Claude actually, let me move this here. Um, Claude actually comes shipped with a skill creation skill, if you can imagine. So this is going to invoke that skill by asking it to create a custom skill for generating the business review summary for our leadership team. And we are working within our weekly operations report project. Nick, while this runs, you want to talk a little bit about that kind of meta skill and how these can be shared?
Yeah, like Mike mentioned, you get skills baked into Claude, and the skill building skill is really helpful. We use it almost on a daily basis. A big part of my role is producing proposals and estimates, and those are informed by transcripts and source material. So rather than run a prompt every single time, I created an estimation skill that gets used almost on a daily basis. And we want consistency with how we use that. So there's a few different ways that you can share skills with your team member. As Mike mentioned, the skills, simple ones especially, are mostly just markdown documents, and we can show you the internals of this. Sometimes there's a little code associated with it. A good example would be to generate an Excel spreadsheet. Sometimes it needs some Python or JavaScript code, but it'll create a folder with the skill markdown file and then any corresponding code. And if you wanted to share it with team members, the simplest way to do it is right click on it, create a zip file, and then in Claude, there's a skill configuration, and you would just upload the skill and add that zip file. And you could share that zip file with other team members, and they'd have access to that. Has just some challenges, like if you made updates or anything like that, then you'd have to remember to reshare that file and have your team update it. The other way that you can share skills is if you have a Claude team account, you can install skills that you can make available across the team. So you install it in the organization settings, and then anyone on your team can then invoke that skill. And that's really powerful and something we use quite frequently. And then last, there's this concept of a skills marketplace. So there's a public marketplace that Claude maintains that has probably hundreds of skills at this point. You can go in, search it, and install it. But you can also create your own internal marketplaces. These are often on GitHub. So we have one, for instance, like our dev team has a whole set of skills where you would commit the skill files to GitHub, and then there's some code that's involved there to publish it as a marketplace. But you essentially would point Claude at that GitHub link, and then it would see all the skills that you maintain, and then it allows you to install and manage and update them. And that's a very powerful feature that we use quite frequently.
Awesome. And so while you were explaining that, Claude prompted a series of questions. It actually recognized I've done this before in practice sessions, and it says you actually already have this skill. So what do you want to do? And so I told it to build a new skill. The data that will feed this report will be from the files that I upload. And it's for the leadership team. We want to create a markdown or document. file. It should use the same categories as the weekly business review project, and I just named the company Acme Corp. So we now have this skill Acme weekly leadership review. Let's go ahead and save this skill. Um, Skills live in this customized section of the sidebar here, and we'll just see skills, and we can come in here and we can view these. So this is the actual text that is this skill file that I can change, but I want to show the uh, code view of this. It's not really code, this is just markdown. But this top piece called frontmatter, this is important. So this is the name of the skill. We're saying this is the Acme Weekly Leadership Review. And the description. The description is important because this is how Claude knows when to invoke your skill. Instead of loading all of the content of all of your skills every time you make a prompt, Claude will just load in this chunk here from all your different skills and then determine from your prompt what skills to use. And so this description is important. We're saying we want to compile weekly data files into a one-page weekly leadership review for Acme Corp's leadership team. Use this whenever the user uploads or points at a set of weekly business data files and wants a summary, review, digest, or report for leadership or a Monday meeting. Also trigger on phrases like, here's this week's number, put together the weekly review, weekly leadership report. And so we then have the actual core of the document, which is exactly what this is, the steps to create this. So inventory the inputs before writing anything, then pick the highlight for each section, then write the report. And we have this template for how we want the report written. Has some other information around like what counts as a red flag. So we're only uh, pointing out red flags when we actually have them, and some style rules and how to deliver it. I'm just going to copy this skill name so I don't get it confused with the other one. So what I can do now is I have this saved. I'm going to create a new session. I'm going to target session 3 and um, let's see. I'll just say run the Acme Weekly Leadership Review skill. So I'll just make this very obvious what I want, only because I have two similarly named skills now. But in general, as long as you're describing kind of what it says in the description, it will automatically pick that up. And I'll use Sonnet again for the sake of time.
One tip to consider is skill hygiene. Claude is generally pretty good at inferring what skill to use, especially if you're very explicit. Like here, Mike put the literal skill name, so it knows exactly what to use. Sometimes if you specify it, but not exactly, it's smart enough to know. But if you have similar skills, sometimes that can cause some confusion. And the more skills you have, the more your context window can be consumed by the description. It's pretty generous, but I wouldn't recommend installing hundreds of skills, or really keep that list pretty pruned to the ones that you use most and add in experimental ones. But I've learned from experience, if you go nuts on the public marketplace and start to install dozens of them, sometimes it can cause some confusion. So just something to keep in mind. It never hurts to periodically audit what skills you have installed and maybe do some spring cleaning periodically.
Awesome, thanks. And so um, right here, you can see I didn't actually upload any documents. But if we look at what's in this folder that I had at Target, I've got these files already there. So in that case, it just says I found the three data files I'm looking for and I'm reading them now. So if those weren't there, it would have said, okay, send me the files, or it would have prompted for those inputs, or I could have added them in this initial prompt. But this is where Cowork gets really cool, is that you can target it around a directory and it can read your files in that directory on your computer. But you can see it ran a skill. If we just look at the steps that it took, it ran a skill. You can see it's this one. It launched that skill. Um, it did some other stuff to pull in and read those CSV files, and then it read them and then created this presentation. So this is another example of an artifact. This also exists on my file system. So if I come into session 3 here, I have this is just markdown, um, this same document that I could put into like a Google Doc or wherever, or I could ask Claude to convert that to a Word doc if I wanted to. But we'll see that same report that we worked on last week uh, outputted here. So we have the same sections with the executive summary, the revenue and sales, our highlights, operations, financial health, red flags, and recommended discussion topics. That's all because that is how our skill file uh, broke out the steps and what we defined as the output that we wanted to see there. Um, all right. That is a brief overview about how skills work. But it's worth kind of noting here that like these skills, this process is now documented in this skill. So I can share this skill around to other people on the team who might also need to generate similar reports from maybe different data sets. And this will have a consistent output. And to Nick's point, you can continually refine and modify these, but you can have them also shareable. So when you modify them, now that same modified, improved skill is distributed throughout your team. Real quick on the ROI math for skills. We've talked about ROI math in the past, but let's just say we have uh, 10 team members, each saving 4 hours a week across like a small library of skills. We're looking about 2,000 hours a year at $100 an hour, fully loaded with benefits. That's $200,000 in recovered capacity. So it's not that the skills replace people, it's that they stop charging skilled people for unskilled work. Um, and we now have saved all of this capacity to apply towards more skilled work. Um, the ROI isn't always the full story. I'll say in that first example with the project calculator, doing the ROI math on that might not be something that hugely moves the needle. I mean, it's probably ROI positive, but probably more in the like 10 to $20,000, not hundreds of thousands of dollars in recovered capacity. But the real win there is consistency and making sure you're not sacrificing project margin because of fudged numbers or somebody had a wacky spreadsheet that didn't output things correctly. So there's other things to think about besides pure ROI. But there's no doubt that encapsulating your workflows as skills and in artifacts can really move the needle in terms of profitability as well. I want to come back to this part of the conversation of the trap here. Vibe coding, which we did in the first demo, is real and it is powerful. You've seen it, but it's also risky. The biggest danger is the what we call the it works trap. That's where you build something and it works and your team loves it and now it becomes load bearing where people are actually using it to run the business and then it breaks and no one can fix it because the person who built it didn't know what they were building in the first place and they just knew that it worked. So code mode is definitely a superpower for personal tools or prototypes or internal utilities where it's not a big deal to rebuild things, but it definitely is not a substitute for real software development when there are high stakes. So just keep that in mind. Like if you are mid ERP modernization, do not vibe code the replacement, the integrations, the data migration. You can, prototype to help kind of show direction or maybe prove little pieces of what you want to do. But a production system that your company or finance team or whoever depends on needs real engineering rigor with source control and tests and a team that can maintain and fix things. We have a few minutes here for tests. We definitely went longer, or sorry, for questions. We definitely went longer today with some more involved demos. Um, let's go with this one. Nick, is the code that Claude writes any good? It's a common one.
Yeah, and this is a good extension of what you just talked about. I'd describe it as functional. It's great for simple tools, um, idea validation, things of that nature. But for complex applications, we definitely see issues. Anything from security, scalability to system design. But I think one of the benefits of a tool like this is it allows you to take your ideas and concepts and get them in users' hands quickly to validate them and get feedback and make updates to the UI in real time. And once you've validated or found product market fit, then you can engage with engineers who have that skill set to help you take it to the next level. I mean, a good analogy is DIY in a house. I mean, I think a lot of people are more than capable of yeah, painting a room or doing basic plumbing, but when you need to start getting into things that require like professional inspection, that's when you want to involve the engineers. And this is something that we see on a weekly basis. I had an example recently where we audited a vibe coded code base. The idea was very sound, but the Claude code um, won't get too far into the weeds, but it didn't even generate an API. It said expose the database directly so that anyone with access to the platform had access to the entire database, could see billing information, private user information. And because this person didn't have that security lens, that exposed, luckily it wasn't live, but exposed potential users to all of that. And that's where we go on and do an audit and help take things to the next level.
Awesome. Maybe one more real quick while we've got the time. What if the skill produces something wrong?
That's what the quality checks are for when you're building out the skill. So when you're thinking about it and describing it, obviously you want to describe what you want it to do, but in your quality checks, you also want to signal what you want it to look out for, what you don't want it to do. And not only when it's building the skill, it's going to consider those quality checks, but within the skill itself, it's going to have a whole section on here's what to look for and either omit or reconsider when it's producing those outputs. So definitely keep that in mind when you're providing the instructions to Claude. And the Claude skill for building the skills has some instructions there, but I think if you explicitly call that out, you're going to get a lot better results.
Yep. And at the end of the day, it's just a text file. So if it gets something wrong, modify the skill file just and you can do it through Claude or just open up the file directly and make the changes that you want to see. All right, so that's all we've got for this week. I would encourage you to kind of pick a spreadsheet or some part of your process and rebuild it, either using Claude Code and artifacts or Skillify some part of your process. I will be following up with some demo prompts in a skill file. Next session is our finale of our four-part series. So definitely have that on the calendar for August 11th. We'll be talking about your team and your strategy. So connectors and your rollout, guardrails. Make sure you attend that. You are already registered, so you're good to go. And start packaging up some artifacts and skills in the meantime. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Reach out to us if you have any questions. We are offering free consultation as part of this. So please take advantage of that, and we'll see you out there. Thanks so much.